Greetings, welcome back. All right, I want to talk about the power rankings and how they have or haven't changed over the last 5 weeks. And keep in mind, I only do them during the regular season, and then in the off season, I'll do a couple, just for draft and free agency and where we think the teams are moving up or down. But I wanted to just take a look at where teams are at as of Saturday. Now, I do these daily. Now, the way that I used to do the power rankings, the way I do them now has changed. So the way I used to do them was if your team wins, you move up. Your team loses, you move down. If your team wins in overtime, you move up less than if you win in regulation. And I treated shootouts as ties. I still treat shootouts as ties. Very often I'll see people saying, well, this team had 3 wins this week. Why didn't they move up? And then I look and I go, oh, a couple of those were in shootouts. So when I see a shootout, I go, it's a skills competition. It's not a team competition. And so I don't move teams up or down based on shootout results. Unless the exception being if the team that won the shootout also had a great game and it shouldn't have gone to a shootout, but the goaltender kind of got it there. So there's always going to be some subjective to any kind of power rankings, but they're not reactionary anymore. Because here's what I found was going to happen. So let's say, let's use Florida as an example. So Florida's at, say, 15th, and they win 3 games in a row. 3 games in a row. A couple teams ahead of them lose. So maybe at the end of that week, they're like 7th. So what was happening was you'd have these crazy swings where a team might end up in the top 5 or the top 10. It really shouldn't be there. But it was just based on, well, they won this week and they lost this week. So there you go. And so it became very reactionary. So I tried not to do that anymore. And so just because a team didn't win games that week doesn't necessarily mean that I look and go, well, all right, they're getting tanked. And I usually wait until that second week, and then if there's a problem, then I'll say, all right, so yeah, this is how they're playing right now. So I'll go through each team and I'll just basically like an overview. In orange is the average rating they've had. So for Anaheim, it's been 29th. So I'm wearing Anaheim, and they even don't match themselves because yeah. For Anaheim, 30th, 28th for 3 weeks running, and then 31st this past week. I have them, 29th is their average. I've seen them higher on other power rankings. They can't score. And the fact that they can't score takes all the power out of their power rankings. Arizona, 20, 25, 23, 21, 22. It averages out to 22.2 so far. And for Arizona, I mean, they're not that far out of the top 16, really, when you look at like 20th at the beginning of the year, and they're 22nd right now. But it's consistency. Boston, they started out 10th, moved up to 8th, then 6th, and then they've been 2nd in the last 2 weeks. And right now, as I'm recording this, I have them at number 1 because I change it every day. At the end of every day, I do go through and make minor changes where need be. That means on Saturday, I don't have to go back. So on week 2, I was going back through records. I was going through individual games. It took me about an hour to update the power rankings board itself before I even made the video. And it just felt like, if I do this daily, then I don't have to do all of the massive changes on the weekend. But I'm obviously not going to do a power rankings video every day. That'd be insane. So for Boston, their average is 5.6. They're above their average. Arizona, 22.2 is their average. They're above their average right now. Arizona's 29 is their average. They're below it. So I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it too. Buffalo, they're a little bit below their average, which is 25. So they've 28th, 23rd, 25th, 23rd, 26th. They've been all over the place, but pretty standard mid to lower 20s. And 25th, so they're 1 spot below their average. Calgary, they're definitely below their average. They started the season 14th, dropped to 22nd, moved up to 18th, down to 19th, down to 25th, because for red it was moving up, for blue it was moving down, and then green is when they stay steady. Their average is 19.6, and they're 25th on this week's power ranking. So for Calgary, things seem to be getting worse, and we'll see with them in Toronto tonight if that continues. Carolina, nice steady climb for Carolina. They were 12th to start the season, moved up to 9th, up to 8th, dropped 1 spot to 9th, and this week they were up to 6th. And again, if I bumped up Carolina to 1st, so let's just say I said, all right, I'm bumping them up to 1st. To me, it would feel highly reactionary right now. It's been a nice, steady, slow climb. If they beat Tampa tonight, they pass Tampa on the board. They pass Tampa on the board. Don't necessarily move to number one, but they would definitely pass Tampa on the board if they beat them again tonight. If Tampa beats them, I don't bump Carolina down. And that's the thing. I don't always move a team down and go, well, they lost. Down you go. You won. Up you go. I pay attention to who their opponents are and how the game progressed. And in some cases, I might say, well, they lost. The refereeing was terrible in that game. Or, the goaltending was pretty good for the other team, and I think they played really well. So I try to pay attention to how well the team's playing as well, and not just the end result. For Chicago, their average is 24.2. Oh, Carolina's average is 8.8. They're above that at 6th on the most recent power rankings. Chicago's average is 24.2, but they've moved up every single week. They are the only team on the board that has moved up every single week. From 31st to 29th, 26th, 18th, 17th. I've seen them as high on power rankings as 12th. I think that's too high. But again, it is all subjective, and I do see some good things there. I do think they may very well end up being 4th in that division. I wouldn't want to play Chicago in a first-round matchup where they could potentially play spoiler. Let's say Tampa finishes first and ends up against Chicago. That could be quite the upset. Colorado's been interesting in that their average is 3.6. They were below that on the last power rankings, but not by much. 4th start the season, then they moved up to 1st, dropped to 4th, 5th, 4th. They're basically very steady in that top 5. They'd have to go on some kind of a long losing streak, and I would have to see a large erosion in their play overall for me to drop them down. Columbus has been pretty consistently around the middle. 21st to start the season, moved up to 16th, up to 15th, down to 17th, down to 19th. 19 is a little bit below their average of 17.6. But for Columbus, yeah, the season's it has the possibility of getting away from them. So while their average is better than Chicago's ahead of them currently. Dallas, I'm not much harder on Dallas apparently than others. I've seen others having Dallas still in the top 10. I'm not sure which Dallas they've been watching. I know they've had a week off, but still. 13th to start the season, moved up to 10th, dropped to 12th, down to 20th, now to 21st. Their average is 15.2 on my power rankings. They were, like I said, 21st this past week. And yeah, I want to see more scoring. They seem to be missing Radulov a lot. And yeah, I have some concerns with Dallas. I have some real valid concerns with Dallas. Detroit is going to be down near the bottom of the charts. That's going to be the case all year. I think their average of 29.4 is the highest. Yeah, it's the highest. 26th to start the season. That first couple of weeks, they looked all right. And then they dropped to 30th, dropped to 31st, moved up to 30th, and they're still 30th now. So they're a little bit below their average of 29.4. That's probably where they're going to spend the season. Edmonton has been moving up. Oh, so it wasn't just Chicago's moved up every week. Edmonton has as well. Not necessarily as quickly as Edmonton fans might have wanted, but they're still getting there. They moved up from 22nd to 21st to 20th to 14th to 11th this past week. And right now, as we speak, I have them in the top 10. 17.6 is their average. They're 11th on their last ranking. They're definitely moving up. And they're way above their average. Florida's moved up almost every week. They were 17th the first week, stayed 17th the following week, moved up to 13th, moved up to 10th, and moved up to 7th. So what changed with Florida? Because their average is 12.8. Right now they're 7th. What changed? They started winning in regulation. And they started winning in more convincing fashion. And they were better. And early on they were getting the results, but there was some shootouts in there as well. And so I wasn't busting them up or down. And they're just playing better. They're getting better. Their confidence is getting better. And the additions of Verhaeghe and with Verhaeghe and Hornquist, it's just been insane. They're so much better, and they're key guys. So for a team that's always struggled with being clutch, they're getting that right now. LA, it's been an up and down season for them so far. They started 27th, moved up to 20th, dropped to 24th, dropped to 27th, but this week they were back up to 20th. And there's a lot of reasons to be positive. And I know Kings fans may, I know there isn't. There is. The veterans are looking better. than they did, especially last season. Their goaltending has been solid, and some of these young kids coming into the lineup look pretty good. Anderson Dolan standing out as an example of that. Their average is 23.6. They're 20th. I would not be surprised if they go higher. If you are underestimating the Kings, you may regret it. The Kings are in against the Blues tonight, and we'll talk about the Blues. Minnesota, they started the season in 8th. That's the only time they've been in the top 10. They've been pretty consistent after that. Dropped to 14th, stayed 14th, moved up to 13th, and dropped to 15th. Right now, 15th is a little below their average of 12.8. Their average would be better because of the 8th spot they had to occupy the start of the season. Minnesota can get back there. We'll see whether or not they do. Montreal currently, again, full transparency, are outside the top 10, but this is where things are interesting when it comes to the power rankings. So, they started the season 3rd, dropped to 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. They've dropped one spot every single week. Their average is 6.6. Right now, they're outside the top 10 after that loss to Ottawa last night. And the reason that loss to Ottawa gets some credence for dropping them down is Ottawa outshot them and outplayed them. So it's not just that Montreal lost, it's how. And that's where, with power rankings, because every week when I do power rankings, I know people go in and go, this team was 1 and 2 and they moved up. I don't even understand the point of this. You're just looking at the result. Every given night, I look at how a team's playing. So for Montreal, they're not playing very well right now. They could really use a game against Vancouver. Just throwing that out there. Nashville is moving down a lot. They started the season in 18th, dropped to 19th, where they stayed for 2 weeks, dropped to 24th, dropped to 27th. I've seen them as low on power rankings as 29th, which I really can't argue with because I've been 27th. Their average is 21.4. They're well below that. This is problematic, and for the Preds, we'll see whether or not they can dig their way out of it. New Jersey, I had started the season with them in 19th. They dropped to 24th, went up to 21st, dropped to 22nd, and they went up to 18th. They have dropped again. So their average is 20.8. Their most recent entry was 18th, but this is, again, where it gets interesting. During the week, teams move around, right? So if I did power rankings on Wednesdays instead of Saturdays, you would have a completely different, not a completely different ranking necessarily for everybody, but some teams that haven't been number 1 on a Saturday have been number 1 at other times of the year. For instance, Boston right now being number 1. But by the time Saturday rolls around, they may be out of first place. So it's always funny to me how people will get really mad. Oh, this team should be first. Well, they were earlier this week. And I don't answer with that. I say they were first on Thursday because it just sounds ridiculous. I always say that the power rankings gives you a snapshot of where they are on Saturday, but it doesn't tell you where they were during the week. And in New Jersey's case right now, they are lower than 18th. They could get back there by the time we hit Saturday. But, yeah, because I know that was something I noticed right away when I started doing power rankings that weren't reactionary. Like I mentioned at the start of this, the reactionary power rankings, was that teams would often end up right back where they started the week. So I'd move them around, and then at the end of the week, I'd look and I go, that's where they were last. All right, okay. So the Islanders, speaking of right where they were last week, they started the season 9th. They dropped to 15th, dropped to 16th, went up to 15th, dropped to 16th. So I like having them 16th, apparently. 14.2 is their average. The highest they've been is 12th. In reality, the highest they've been is 12th on any given day. But the highest they've been, and that's since they were 9th. They've also been 12th during one of these weeks. Because I know I had them up, and then they lost. All right. Rangers, 25th to start the season. They went down to 27th, went up to 22nd, dropped to 26th, went up to 23rd. And we'll see without Panarin how long that lasts and whether or not they drop again. But 24.6 is their average. They were 23rd on Saturday. It's a mediocre number, but it's pretty consistent. Ottawa started at 23rd, which was high. And then they dropped to 31st. And they've been 29th for the last 3 weeks, which is very consistent. Their average is 28.2. They have the highest average number and just above Detroit. So at the end of the year, one thing that I like to do is do an overall average of where everybody is in the power rankings. And it's always funny because people will then get mad at me for math. But that's, again, we'll see whether or not I do that at the end of this season. I'm obviously trying to keep track of all this. It's a compacted season, so I think it's easier to keep track of than when the season's, 27 weeks? Most regular seasons, it's a lot, and this year it's like 15 or 16, so it's easier to keep track of. But yeah, we'll see where the Ottawa Senators end up at the end of the year, but don't be surprised when they're near the bottom. Philadelphia, the bottom's dropped out for Philadelphia right now. Here's the other part too. So Philadelphia started the season 15th. They moved up to 11th to 9th to 7th, and now they've dropped to 8th. There was a power ranking I saw today that has them below the Rangers, and I see that and I go, no, 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 no. So their average is 10th, and they were 8th when I did the power rankings on Saturday. They've dropped since then, but really, I mean, Philadelphia hasn't played with a full complement of players, and when everybody's hurt or everybody's on the COVID list, whatever the reason is, it's hard for me to justify just dropping the bottom out for a team and just, oh, nope, they're crap. Because they're dealing with a situation that they don't have their full complement, and so I want to wait until they have some of those players back in the lineup before I drop them too much. They're not 8th right now, they have dropped, but I don't want to make this massive drop take place where I put them down at 18th or 19th. And then the following week, let's say all those guys come back, they play really well, and then they go right back to 8th. Again, it just makes it feel like it doesn't. It makes it feel like it doesn't matter. Pittsburgh, 16th was where they started out the first week. They went up to 13th, dropped to 17th, went up to 16th, and they're 12th on the most recent power rankings. 14.8 is the average. So again, they're above their average. Pittsburgh, never count them out. Don't count them out. San Jose, they started the season 24th. They dropped to 26th, dropped to 27th, went up to 25th. This week they were 24th. Their average is 25.2. Very consistent. It's just the goaltending, the numbers have been poor. The defense, the numbers have been poor. The structure issues this team has. There's just too much there that even though their record has been okay, they're 7-7-2 currently, there are still concerns I have there. So if they start having games where they're only allowing 1 or 2 goals, and we start seeing their goaltending numbers improving, then I have no problem moving them up. But there are concerns. St. Louis. So my most recent, they moved up to 10th, right? They started the season 6th. They dropped to 7th, dropped to 10th, dropped to 11th, and moved back up to 10th this week. But they moved up to 10th because Washington took a nosedive. Otherwise, they would still have been 11th. I don't think I've seen anything with them. Their average is 8.8. Currently, they're at 10th according to the Saturday power rankings. I haven't seen anything with St. Louis that's really changed my opinion about them one way or the other since the start of the season. I think they're still top 3 in their division. I don't have them in the same category as Colorado or Vegas. We'll see if that remains the case before the end of the season. But I think they're the 3rd best team in that division. And while they do have their struggles against San Jose, I still think they're probably that 3rd best team in the division. And we'll see this upcoming week how things go. Game against LA tonight is going to tell me a lot. So LA's been moving up. St. Louis has stayed pretty steady, 10 or 11, right? If LA goes in and beats St. Louis tonight, and if it is a 4-1 game and LA wins this legit, that's when St. Louis takes a drop, and that's when LA goes up. So when I say, you know what, LA is legit, that's their 4th win in a row. For St. Louis, that's now 3 out of 4, and that's a problem. And that's when they start to drop. 1 or 2 games I'm not going to make a big deal about. Tampa's been very remarkably consistent. They've just started to have problems recently. So they were 1st for 3 out of 5 weeks, 2nd 1 week, and 3rd in the past week. The average is 1.6. I don't want to drop Tampa way down. And I know Tampa's had problems the last couple of games. We'll see how they do against Carolina tonight. If they don't have that bounce back against Carolina tonight, as I said, talking about Carolina would pass them. So that to me says, all right, Tampa, there may be issues here. Yes, they're without Cirelli. Yes, they don't have Kucherov this year, but still, Carolina moves past them. And again, it's a statement I make not because I cheer for Tampa over Carolina. It's because I don't want it to be reactionary again. That was a nightmare when it was reactionary. When I'm starting up a power rankings, I'm looking at the board and going, why is Edmonton 5th? And then I look and I go, well, yeah, they won 4 in a row, but they're not better than these other teams that they're ahead of. I know those teams lost a couple of games, but all right. And then I don't have anything. I can't back these up. I used to just say, well, the board tells me what's going to happen. The board dictates it. I don't, and I didn't like that. Toronto. So people talk about Toronto being first, and it's a crap division. They shouldn't be first. Okay, we can have the discussion of whether or not the North is good defensively. The North has some good teams in it. They're dominating the North. They're not going to play other divisions. If we want to make it so that certain divisions aren't allowed to be first on the power rankings, that's a whole other discussion. But for me, I can't really go by anything other than they've got a great record. They bounced back from that humiliating defeat against Ottawa last Monday. And then TSN had them number one in their power rankings this morning, and I went, oh, because it just but that's why mine come out on Saturday. I've had people ask me, why don't you just do yours on like a Monday or a Tuesday? Because then mine would come out the same day or a day later than everybody else's. And I've learned that I have to do my power rankings first. So at the start of the season, I have to make sure mine come out first, because otherwise there will be people who look at my power rankings and say, well, he's clearly influenced by power rankings from this site. And so I want to make sure I'm first, so I'm out ahead of that. Toronto, 5th, 3rd, 4th, 1st. They've been top 5 all season. Their average is 3.6. They've been very good. Again, we can look at that meltdown against Ottawa. I thought it was funny, and then they proved they didn't by winning the next 3 in a row and in a convincing fashion. So for Toronto, right now, they're not number one because Boston passed them. But by this coming Saturday, could they be back in first place? Yep, absolutely. Vancouver, it's been an up and down season for Vancouver. 29th, the first power rankings, moving up to 18th, dropping to 30th, 31st, and then this past week moving up to 28th. Their average is 27.2. I am not too hard on Vancouver. I've been accused of this in past years, and I'm not. This is just. It is so hard to watch their games and see the lack of structure, see the turnovers, see the lack of focus, because when you're watching every game, you could really zero in on which teams don't have offense in Anaheim, which teams just don't have the top end talent to score and win games like Detroit, which teams are making the effort but have the same problems Detroit, Ottawa. And then in Vancouver, the talent's there. Everything's there, but the results aren't there. So, it comes down to there might be work problems with certain players. There's definitely some foundational problems with this team, and they're so far into the season, I don't know if they can turn it around. So they've stayed near the bottom for the most part. That move from 29th to 18th and back to 30th, that was that 4-game winning streak they got on. 3 of those were against Ottawa, but then that 4th game against Winnipeg, they looked like they had it all figured out, and then Montreal, Thanos snapped them into oblivion. Vegas started the season 2nd on the power rankings, dropped to 3rd, moved up to 2nd, dropped to 3rd, and dropped to 5th. So their average is 3rd on the power rankings. They have been first. They're one of those teams that has occupied first, just not on a Saturday. So I could change the day of the week I do them, but I'm not gonna. But yeah, Vegas is really not convinced me necessarily that they're a favorite to win, but I understand why they're one of the favorites. I would still argue Colorado over Vegas. I still think Colorado, especially if that young blue line holds together and Byram's really coming together. Vegas, that's going to be an interesting battle, and we see it again tonight. And they're right next to each other on the power rankings for good reason. Washington, the bottom's dropped out for Washington. I'm not sure how you figure all this out, but yesterday's result was nice, but I didn't bump them up for that result. Gonna be honest. They were 7th when I started this off the first week, moved up to 4th, dropped to 5th, dropped to 6th, and this past week they were 14th. And no, didn't bump them up based on yesterday's result. It was a nice comeback. We'll see if it's a trend. Again, we'll see whether or not they can back that up with another game of that nature. They've had good games, and then they fall right back into poor bad habits, and they're usually wearing their thirds. They're wearing their thirds almost as much as Edmonton, but nobody's wearing their thirds as much as Edmonton. I think those are going to be their primary jerseys. But yeah, so the Capitals, their average is 7.2, and they're 14th on Saturday, meaning they're well below their average. And then Winnipeg started the season 11th, dropped to 12th, went up to 11th, dropped to 12th, dropped to 13th. Their average is 11.8. That's about right. So there are certain teams that kind of stay in that same area. And so on any given Saturday, there might be people who say, well, this team went 3-0 and this team went 1-0 or 1-2 or 1-3. So clearly these moves are going to have to happen. Not necessarily. Again, the biggest thing about a power rankings is not to be too reactionary. Because again, then it means it doesn't really matter. You're kind of saying, all right, so this is the team that won this week. There you go. And you also don't have to start fresh every week either, which has been a conversation before on this channel. Like, well, maybe you should just talk about who played best in the games that week. It just becomes a mess. So it has to be kind of gradual, and it's always fun to look back. So there you go. The first 5 weeks in almost 26 minutes of time. So thank you guys so much for all your support. I really do enjoy looking at the power rankings like this and having fun with it. And I enjoy that, you know, you guys still support it. You guys still watch the videos, and you guys still downvote them just as much as ever. It's just, it warms the cockles of the heart. It really does. Thank you guys so much for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just tapping upon this video. And hey, I will talk to you guys again soon.